Okay, fellow babies, welcome back to Pachter Factor on SIFTD.net. And those of you who are patrons on Patreon, thank you so much for your support. Those of you who have the kindness in you to link your Amazon Prime account to your Twitch Prime account, thank you. We're getting paid by Amazon and Twitch. And those of you who are subscribing to our YouTube channel, thank you so much. We're getting paid. Today's question from Sifted from ZN Trip. It has been reported that AT&T is looking to sell its WB Games division. Is this a good idea for AT&T? If it is sold, who would be the most likely buyer? How does the purchase make sense if most of the valuable IP like DC and Harry Potter might still be owned by AT&T? Do I have any insight into this? I have zero insight into what is going to happen because I don't know. And I don't speak to anybody at AT&T. I used to talk to the Warner Brothers Games guys a lot, but they've been acquired. And since the acquisition, probably, I think I saw a couple of them at DICE, so I've seen them this year. But because of no GDC and no E3 and no my party at E3, I just haven't been in contact with these guys. The answer is AT&T took on a lot of debt to buy Warner Brothers, Time Warner. And I don't remember the debt load, but it's like an $80 billion acquisition. I think their debt is something way up there, 50 to 80 billion. They owe a lot of money. And, interest rates are coming down. And then, of course, COVID has thrown the country into a recession, which tends to drive interest rates low. So the good news is their debt service isn't that bad. The bad news is they paid too much for the assets, and people are cutting the cable cord, which is a big source of funds for AT&T. They own DirecTV, and obviously they make cable retransmission fees from all the WB network and stuff. And so they got to pay down debt, and they're looking to sell non-core assets. And the guy who runs AT&T, who ran it, Randall Stevenson, retired. And I had heard that he said, no way, no how, we're not selling it. The guy who runs AT&T now, John Stankey, I think doesn't care, and he's trying to make sure that the company thrives as a whole. And so he's going to pay off debt as he can. So yes, I believe the rumors. I believe the assets are for sale. I haven't seen any financials, so I'm just pulling numbers out of my butt on this one. But WB Games probably does between 500 million and $1 billion in revenue each year. And the variability is like, if they don't launch anything, they have some mobile revenue. They make like Game of Thrones mobile, which does, I'm sure, $200-300 million. It's a pretty good game. And catalog sales of, Shadows of Mordor and Batman, Arkham Asylum and Injustice and Mortal Kombat and whatever. And in a year where they launch a game, Mortal Kombat's probably 8 million unit kind of seller, and Shadows of Mordor is probably about a 5 to 8 million unit kind of seller, and Batman probably around there. So in a year where they launch a game, $1 billion. So somewhere in that range. So pretty nice and well run. The guy who runs it, Dave Haddad, is very sharp, good business guy. The studio heads love him. He is a good, hands-off, supportive manager. So I think they do a phenomenal job. And they used to be run by Kevin Tsujihara at Warner Brothers, who ran Warner Brothers. He's a movie guy, but he's a really good business guy, and he just put together a good model. So they have the TT Games guys who make all the Lego Batman kind of games. They have Rocksteady, who makes the Batman games. They have NetherRealm, who makes all the Injustice and Mortal Kombat games. So they cobbled together some really good studios. And the studios themselves are probably worth a couple $1 billion because they're so good and there's so many of them. The ongoing library of content is worth a lot, and they own stuff like Mortal Kombat, which they would theoretically just sell with the sale. So the real operative question in your question is, what do they do with IP like Harry Potter, and what do they do with IP like the entire DC universe, which is could be an Aquaman game or a Wonder Woman game or a Green Lantern game or a Justice League game. in addition to Batman, Superman, Flash, and you guys are really shocked I know so much about comic books, but I'll let you in on a guilty little secret. I was a huge comic book collector, and I have literally hundreds, maybe thousands, probably maybe 1,000 comic books dated 1964 or earlier. So Warner Brothers owns all this IP. The IP has value beyond games. So when Stanky at AT&T says, we're going to sell this Warner Brothers Interactive because it's a non-core asset, he means the games part. He's never going to sell the license rights to DC. But he might sell perpetual license rights to use DC characters in video games only and nothing else. So the open question is, if somebody buys Warner Brothers Interactive, do they get all the studios, but then if they produce a Batman game, they have to pay a 20% of sales royalty for the right to use Batman? Or do they pay twice as much up front and then they own the right to use Batman in any game, anytime? Not in movies or books or comic books or whatever, just in games. And so let's hope that somebody who's a Pachter Factor fan works at AT&T and is watching this and gets to their management, because I think you could sell Warner Brothers Interactive with its $1 billion a year in revenue and probably $300-400 million in profit for $3 or $4 billion. I think you could sell Warner Brothers Interactive with perpetual license rights to the DC brand, Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings, whatever else, obviously Mortal Kombat, Injustice, whatever IP that they actually own, for $7 or $8 billion. So I think the value would go way up. And the reason for that is I think a company like Activision wouldn't bid on a license play. They don't license very much. And I'll say it politely, but they don't get along well with others. So they didn't do a good job with Destiny because they didn't like having to pay the Bungie guys ongoing royalties. They do really well with Call of Duty that they own, and Blizzard, all those assets that they own. They just don't like paying royalties. Where EA and Take-Two are fine paying royalties, and obviously all their sports licenses are licensed properties, royalties. EA has done Star Wars, which is royalty. So EA is the likely bidder, I think, for these assets. But if you include the IP rights and say you can use any DC character, Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings, and I think Warner Brothers might even own like Winnie the Pooh. I mean, they have rights to like weird stuff. But if they say that and you pay us once and you have perpetual rights, then that's a really valuable property because there's no ongoing payment. You have the capital up front, but then you have much more profitable business because you're not paying a royalty. And I think then Activision would get interested and you get a bidding war. So I think it would be smart for Warner Brothers, for AT&T, just to get a bidding war. Be good to find out what Dave Haddad thinks and where he'd like to work, because he's the one guy who might be at risk, depending on whether Activision or EA takes over, because Activision tends to chase off senior guys. That's just what they do. And EA, I'm not sure. I think he'd thrive. He's good. I think he'd thrive at both. But anyway, don't know the answer. I think that Take-Two is unlikely to outbid EA. I think Activision won't bid unless license rights are included. And just as a analogy for that, or an example of that, when Ubisoft bought the Tom Clancy licenses, that's exactly what they bought. They bought the right to use Splinter Cell, Rainbow Six, Ghost Recon, and any other Tom Clancy novel or setting in a game. So that's how they got The Division. That's where it came from. And they're perpetual rights for games only. You can't make a book out of it or a movie out of it, but they have the rights to anything in the Tom Clancy universe to make a game. And they paid up, at the time, I think they paid like $70 million. So it's super cheap. But that was a smart business deal. And I think you'll probably see Warner Brothers try to pull the same thing. If you are watching us on SIFTD.net as a Patreon patron, thank you so much. We appreciate your patronage. If you're watching on Twitch because you've linked your Twitch Prime and your Amazon Prime account, thank you so much. We appreciate Amazon's patronage. If you're watching as a subscriber on YouTube, thanks for subscribing. If you're watching it free on YouTube because you're too lame or have no job, okay, I get that. Please follow me on Twitter at Michael Pachter. See you next time. And the reason I know the date is because comic books, back to our $70 game question, comic books went from 10 cents a comic book to 12 in 1964. So I have boxes of 10-cent comic books in my garage. Boxes. I don't even know how many. A lot. And I have a lot from the later 60s. So I have a lot of 12-cent comic books too. And then when they went to 15, I stopped buying them. So for real, like I don't have any that are post maybe 1970 or 68 or something. But because I am so good at forecasting, you guys know I've never been wrong. I thought Marvel comics were bullshit. I did not like them. I read them and I was just like, these are stupid. And I just didn't care about Iron Man. I didn't. I thought, or Captain America or the Hulk. I was like, or the Fantastic Four, X-Men. I'm like, these are just really stupid. And I was collecting comic books when like issue 1 of all those things came out. I mean, I think I may have, well, for sure I was in the store and they were on the shelf and I could have bought them. But instead I have like Superboy, you know, almost a complete set, or the Jimmy Olsen series, and I definitely have Justice League like 1 through 15. Like I have. So I was a DC fanboy. I own so many DC comics, I can't even tell you. So I actually really do appreciate how big a deal Warner owning DC is. And I remember years ago, I met somebody at Warner Bros. I can't remember who it was, but they put me in touch with the woman who ran DC. It was so cool. And it's another woman now. She's the one I met is gone, but I went and visited them. I think they were in New York City, but I went and visited DC and I met all the artists. It was so cool.